All right, good morning, everyone. We're doing another recap video to go over a couple things that might be in our future that have certainly been in our past. But first, let's go over the basics. Let's go over QM veracity check with Big Tone and Toby Martin, which is actually the alternative original name before I even knew what it was, because this was still technically a QM check, but it was a correspondence between me and Big Tone describing the necessary features of every single obligate puppet poison case where we had people mysteriously losing control of their entire body and performing heinous acts and being unable to remember or do anything about it other than accept the consequences. So how could that possibly work? It's going to be mechanical. So this is a cross-section of the brain, right about at the brainstem. And so to recap, what happens is that you're basically dosed by some means, clearly unscrupulously, usually by touching a so-called lucky object that magically makes things appear, and usually that entails getting dosed with a few molecules of brominated or possibly fluorinated. I'm not actually sure. It's usually one of the ones that are even more powerful, so probably brominated because it lasts longer, if I understand it correctly. Fluorinated, I think, would therefore be refeed, because it disables it for very briefly. But it's a smaller molecule versus bromine, which would make it a larger molecule because the atom has so many more protons. Anyways, so what happens is that you get a bunch of entangled bromine, brominated ketamine on this part of the brain right here, on this side of the corpus callosum, on the sen side, and then you can disable the reactivity side by usually picking someone who is a ketamine addict who's using unentangled R-ketamine, and basically you have this entire side of the brain entangled to someone else. You have them take unentangled S, and then whatever that disables their inputs here, and their input, and then therefore goes through here because it's entangled bromine. And what happens next is they take control through the brainstem. So that in mind, why is this so important, and why is it done with bromine? Because in the past, with S-ketamine, like the Library of Alexandria, it was kept in the ink, hoping that people who read it would be entangled from either touching the pages or by reading the words. And so when the Library of Alexandria was burnt by Peter the Reader, it sent a bunch of S-ketamine into the atmosphere, entangling the whole world so that we might actually have some chance of connecting with each other. Because I think the reason why this concept works at all, at least figuratively for the purposes of discussion, is that the world and the universe are more thermodynamically stable if we worked together. So that's why these seems to transfer energy between one another. But as you know, ketamine here has a chlorine here. So supposing we replace it with a bromine, which has, let's see, what's 35 minus 17? Well, anyways, this one has that many more protons on it, and probably a few neutrons as well, making it much larger and much heavier, and would probably substitute in on that chlorine. And so that will get us into the next concept, which is called quantumly linked sockets. So I will begin this new paper here. Quantumly, I'm not sure if that's a real word or not, but it's quantumly. We'll maybe just add it to the dictionary later. Quantumly linked sockets. Oops, 30th, 25. I was up all night after all. Anyways, so quantumly linked sockets. We're going to touch onto this a little bit based on also this paper, which I wrote yesterday, involving THC and this alkane tail. So how would this take on a chiral character, and how might this take on an entanglement character? Well, it turns out if you wrap around this alkane tail just a little bit around another S-ketamine, over here, and just got around it in just such a way, you might actually pick up some of its entangling properties just by having those electron clouds interact with one another. When you have an RS reversal, go and that electron drops out of existence from here and appears here again, that current might also affect the THC molecule as well. And so you might even have some entanglements, especially if you are on a QM already, which is shorthand for RS ketamine network. So let's talk synapses, because you can have other chiral formations that are proteins, and it's like in addition to enzymes, we have synapse proteins. So I'll just go ahead and sketch a socket here, like this, and then we'll say this is like part of the cell wall, and then there's some other features. I don't actually remember a whole heck of a lot of cell anatomy. I'm just assuming that something is there. I might actually have to borrow this diagram here, because the supposition is that maybe this molecule binds with nitrogen like over here, has this stick out here, over here, and maybe this like goes out to like this, and then we have our cyclohexane like that. Excuse me, cycloacetone like that, and then let's see, the benzyl, possibly flat. Who knows? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Chlorine, and then sound effects for you. Anyway, suppose that just gets locked in here and this maybe curls around like that. This chiral link socket, which is a 3-feature unit, which takes on a handed shape when this depresses into the socket like so. This could therefore take on at least most of these properties where this chiral center, this chiral center here goes through its reversal from that electron go here to here, causing a tiny current. And if you had enough of these, you could possibly measure it, but it's like, oh, this increment of time where it drops in and out is probably about a Planck second, or at least something on that scale, I'm guessing, because the reversal is so small, the mass of the electron is so tiny, and the activity is so fine that even when it drops from here to here, which is about twice the width of the molecule, it still resembles a current enough to be detected. And we know this is true because, well, I'm telepathic. Anyways, but basically, if we had something like this, what if we had a much larger bromine on this here? And so this one has a different electronegativity value, or even fluorine. Both of these have different electronegativity, which may draw off some of the binding ability or add to it, regardless of what it is, where this nitrogen is fixed to its binding site. And so if this were to actually be so large that we literally push the protein around it like this, you would have permanent binding affinity, at least for several hours, until you have a life or death event, an ice bath, or some other problem. But yeah, these entanglements of these ketamine, especially if you secrete them from your skin, which is apparently something that happens especially when you sweat. Suppose you were to touch a metal object. Now we have metal objects which have, yes, magnetic domains like this, but they are chaotic, but they have so many electrons in the d orbitals that you can basically have quantumly linked sockets just by press fitting these pieces together. So stamped parts are especially likely to take on chiral character, such as for use of weapons and tools, which is primarily what you would want to entangle with some sort of ketamine to detect who and what had taken the ketamine, and also how to observe it from afar, even if you do not know who initially stole the object, which is how this property was initially discovered, I think. Let's see, so we covered detenting, we covered the d orbitals taking on chiral character. Let's say this is metal, and this is a synapse protein. And this is the detent holding bromine. Okay, so and then likewise in the reverse sense, if we shrank this down into a fluorine, this is F, right? If we shrink this down to a fluorine, now it's so small it can pop in and out, but that also means it can bind extremely fast. So if you wanted to have someone, oh, I don't know, forget what they say or forget what they're thinking and be unable to react to what's going on, you would have something that binds along this side and very quickly. So my supposition is that this would be, roofies would be R unentangled fluorinated ketamine, or ketamine, as I call it, just to be funny. Broken ketamine, just like most of the thing it is, because it's definitely broken in the eyes of the law. So be aware of that. But apparently being dosed with it is, and becoming entangled with your parents before birth, like I have been, is the only way to prevent yourself from being OPP'd. And the consequences are grisly, at least until recently, now that we figured it out entirely mechanically and completely, just as I've done right here. And so to finish off this little lecture, I think there was one more thing. Oh, right, and so if a bunch of houses suddenly caught on fire because they're all under surveillance and they were also laced with brominated ketamine, we basically dosed the entire United States and then some of the world with a bunch of permanent binding affinity bromine, and whoever's entangled on the other enantiomer could do what they wanted if they could somehow figure out who had what. And if it was everyone, it might be easy. So heads up for that. Don't let any house fire start. Thanks, bye.